Hi, Kelly.
Hey, Mike.
How are you doing?
I am excellent. How are you?
I'm doing great. Today, I was thinking maybe we could talk about service connectors.
Yes, please. Lots of cool stuff you can do there. I'm excited to
Yeah.
show some of it off.
Yeah. So, just so we just set the table for everybody, right? Is that a service connector is needed in order for the Azure build process and release process to talk to other services that are not inside of Azure DevOps. The service connectors can be used to connect to AWS, to Azure itself, to BitBucket, and to a lot of other systems that has to integrate it, wherever your source code is or whatever. We're going to go ahead and use it to connect to our Azure environment to deploy our fictitious Parts Unlimited site that you see on the screen. Sound good?
Yeah, sounds great. There's like I said, lots of cool stuff you can do here. Basically, anything that you want Azure DevOps to talk to or be talked to by, that's where those service connectors come in. Show me what you got.
Yeah. So I've done a little bit of pre-planning on this one because there can be some hiccups and whatnot, and I'm just trying to go hiccup free. But basically, I'm just going to start off with our pipeline. And let's just talk a little bit about our release pipeline that we have. And we've talked a lot about release pipelines and build pipelines. So I think at this point we have a good understanding of what those are. But let's talk about this deploy Parts Unlimited, which is the website that we've built a couple of times. And we want to deploy this website out to Azure. And in order to talk to Azure, we need, for Azure DevOps to talk to Azure and a website, it needs to be a valid connection. And obviously, I don't want to use Mike as the service connection, because what happens if Kelly has to deploy the app, or somebody else that joins the company later has to deploy an app? So we use a service connector which acts as that agent, and what has to happen, at least for the Azure standpoint, is it will create a service account or a service principal that is used inside of Azure, in Azure Active Directory, that the Azure DevOps will be able to interact with. So let's just take a look at this pipeline. And I'm going to start off with...
And real quick, while you're opening that up, I also kind of want to note one of the reasons you might do that on top of, the difference between Mike and Kelly doing it is it's like a service account. If you were talking about more old school server type of, I don't want to have to worry about multi-factor authentication or passwords expiring. I can have limited permissions and all that kind of stuff really makes it useful.
Yep. So, of course, me and oversimplifying everything is that this release pipeline is using a task group, which we talked about in another one. Let me go into the task group and take a look at it, because that's really what we need to focus on. So I have this deploy Parts Unlimited task group to the site, Parts Unlimited site task group. And in here we have the Azure App Service deploy, which is actually going to push everything out to Azure. But one of the things that it needs is an Azure subscription, and also the way to connect to that, because I'm deploying to Azure, because that's the task, it needs to be able to connect to Azure. What I have here is a reference to my Azure subscription. And if I click on Manage, if I don't have one, it'll actually take me to where I can create one. But here is the information of that service connector as displayed down here as service connectors. And what this is it's just establishing, again, a service principal that will be able to talk to Azure. And I'm going to click on the Manage Service Principal, which takes me over into Azure itself and tells me a little bit more information about this. It's not really a user, but it is a way to work with Azure. And you can give this this guy here certain rights to very limited scope inside of Azure if you need to. Right now, this user is pretty much trusted. It's my user against my Azure subscription, so I'm not too worried. But if you had other subscriptions or other sections that, if you're managing an Azure instance and you need to segregate certain areas, you could certainly just restrict the use of where this service principal can go. But I want to actually step through creating a new service principal. So this guy is fine, right? I can use him, but I'm going to create one that is, just to demonstrate how this works. It's pretty simple. So we'll click on Manage, which will take us over to here. I'm going to click on Service Connectors. And it's just going to give me a list of all the service connections I have, and I just have that one, but I want to create a new one. And it's pretty simple. Everything in this, there's nothing you have to do by hand, but it's really super simple. So before I go on, I want to show you that we have a lot of different choices that we can do for a service connector. The one we're going to use is this Azure Resource Manager, which is pretty much the main Azure service connector you'll use for any time you want to connect to it. But if you look at this list, I mean, it's a large list of different types of connectors that are out of the box. I didn't do anything special to install these. And if you do need, which is really nice, the extensibility model in Azure DevOps, another topic, allows you to actually create service connectors that would show up in here through the extensibility framework inside of Azure DevOps. But you know, if I
there's lots in the marketplace too, so other people have created some that you can add on.
That's right, and we can go take a look at those in a second. But if we wanted to connect to ServiceNow, like if you did a ticketing system, you could click on ServiceNow, and I'm not going to go through it, but by going into ServiceNow, what it's going to do is it's going to ask you for credentials that can log in and authenticate you to ServiceNow. Again, though, Azure itself does not require your username and password that binds to it. It just needs a username and password that has the rights to create the service principal in Azure. So you have to have certain rights inside of Azure as a user, and I have those rights, thankfully. For like, I think you have to have, I don't remember the exact rights, but I do believe you have to have more than just contributor in order to get into it. So I'm going to select the Azure Resource Manager, and I'll go next, and it gives me a couple of choices here. So I could do the automatic, which is very simple. It'll ask me for authentication if I'm not authenticated to Azure already. Or if I already know a service principal, I can actually do it manually, and when I do it manually, it's going to ask me certain information, the authentication, the credentials, and I can get all of this information inside of Azure by, you know, most of it I get from here, you know, whether it's the client ID, the tenant, which is in here somewhere, and then I can also create a new secret that would be like the password, so this becomes the client secret. And that would just get put
so you could use
this.
that manual one if, say, you didn't have permission, you were in a larger organization where people who managed your Azure instance were different than your Azure DevOps. They could give you this information. You could still do it manually.
They could give the DevOps people, and again, since that user, that service account or service principal can be guarded and only access certain things. Let's say I'm working on project A. I may get a service principal that can only target anything in Project A in Azure. So maybe it's a certain resource group or whatever. So you can fill this all out. It's really, really helpful. But I'm just going to go with the automatic because, again, you know, I don't have a lot that I have to do. And I'm going to select my subscription. And if I have multiple subscriptions, I can, of course, add this. And, you know, I can add a new subscription. So if I have, and why might I have multiple subscriptions, is maybe I have a development subscription that is working off of a dev test subscription. And then I might have a production subscription, which again may have limited access. Maybe only a couple people have that access. And then so I can add this here. And then I can take that service principal and I can make sure that's only used for a certain project inside of Azure DevOps to keep it kind of secure. I don't need to do that here. So I'm just going to say which resource group, and for now I'm just going to put it into my main pipeline software resource group that I use, and I'm just going to give this a wonderful name, Mike Demo Service Principal.
At least we know what it is.
That's right, and this is just a demo. And I'm going to go ahead and allow access to all of my pipelines inside of my entire Azure, my Azure DevOps. I could turn this off, and then I have to go and specify which one as I go. But for now, you know, feel free to play with those kind of things. But I'm just going to go ahead and set this one up. Again, very simple, very easy. Now I have this service principal here, and I'm going to go back into my Deploy Azure Pipelines, click the little refreshy button, and then it should show up in here as the Mike Demo Service Principal. So now I've just done it. Now it's going to say, hey, look, you know, because you had this other one in there, it definitely needs other information that I need to come into. Now, unfortunately for me, is I had this already set up for everything, and these were all variable driven. So I need to just go back and take a look at all my variables that I think I had for it, and maybe I don't. But these, you would put all of this information in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to discard any of my changes, and this way I keep everything the way it was. And you can see that I have these app names resource groups set on release. This is another topic, but this is using a way to pass in parameters and everything. So I'm not going to worry about that. But you can see that I have all of this information, right, that's already there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat a little bit and just remember app-name and resource-group. So now I remember what it is. So I'll go back to this guy. So app-name and resource-group. And if I forget, Kelly, I'll of course remind me, because you know.
I'll do my best.
That's right. So $, and then it's app-name. And then this one was $resource, RESOURCE group. Okay, and
spelling with people watching, it's always hard.
Oh, always. And then for this, I'm just going to say production slot. I'm not really doing slot deployments on this, but I'll just use it as a production slot. And then I'm just going to save this guy, and it will put in. It puts those variables back in here. So I'm just going to remind myself that this is set on deploy. And I'm just going to give you, the reason why I do this is I don't need this to be a parameter that's passed in because of how I'm doing my deployments through this app configuration. Again, I think it's another great topic that we can talk about. But when this guy runs, it's going to go and find out what app name I'm deploying to for the environment I'm deploying it to, and which resource group, which is all saved inside of that. So we don't need to worry about anything else here. I'll save this again. And we're going to go take a look at our deployment. So let's go back into the release of this, this Parts Unlimited. And let's just go ahead and create a release real quick. And we already know that's already configured. Again, the task grouping did all that. So we'll create a release. Now, if everything was set up correctly and we're good, this should deploy Parts Unlimited in a minute or two, and we should be good to go. So let's watch it and see if we have any errors. So it's queued.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. That's right. That's the thing with these live demos, right? So in this very quick, short video that we have, we just kind of covered real fast what is a service principal. Again, it's a way to talk to a system outside of Azure DevOps that you may need to deploy to. It's very easy to create. You shouldn't be intimidated by them. And what you can do is you can connect to a whole host of things. So Kelly had mentioned, you had mentioned that if we look at the marketplace, we can actually go take a look at the marketplace if I click on the right thing. So I guess we have to. I think it launches into another one, right? Another tab. Nope. Well, we'll come back, and let's just look for service connections. See what's out here. Service principals, right? See if there's any.
Maybe a service connection.
Service connection. Okay, yeah. So it may have see connection. So there's quite a few different service connections that you can import into your DevOps. Datadog or Service Catalog or Service Fabric. I will say this on one that I'm not a huge fan of using because of how it has to get set up. And that is, while this is running, let's go take a look at these service connections again. So the one that I have found the most trouble is deploying a Kubernetes environment and then the application on Kubernetes. So
why is that? Yeah,
so Kubernetes, setting up a Kubernetes environment, then in order to have a service connection to that environment, you actually have to go back in and say, oh, I want a Kubernetes service connection. And so this service connection here is going to look for an already deployed service connection. And so if I want to deploy something into Kubernetes using our Azure Container Registry, and then I actually have to have the Kubernetes environment set up. So that may not sound like a big deal, but if you're building a Kubernetes environment and then you want to deploy on top of that environment the application, you have to stop and go create the service connection. Now, thankfully, there are a whole host of APIs that you can call. You can command line this and script it out also to go create that service connection. But it's another step. So you can't create that service connection and then have it forever, because it's tied directly to that Kubernetes instance unlike what I just created. I don't have to have the environment in order to use my connection that I just created. I can just go use that to create the environment and then use it to deploy. So that's the one that I find that is not as easy. But again, it's not that it's hard. It's just that there's a couple different steps for it.
And it really, kind of shows you that everything that you're doing, that you're clicking through here, you can also do through the API, through code and scripting.
Yeah. So it looks like we have a failure here. Again, these things are always fraught with challenges. So this one is our publishing credentials. The client with object ID does not have authorization to perform the action or the scope. So what I'm going to do just now, just so we... Okay. It really bothered me that we couldn't get our build and our deploy to actually deploy when we set up that new service connection. So I went back and investigated what happened. So let me show you. In our service connection, we have this mic demo SP. And originally, it was actually scoped to the wrong resource group. I had it scoped to the pipeline software, which is my main resource group for all global things in my subscription. Really, where I needed to have it scoped was for the RG Pipelines Dev East US, so it would apply only to that resource group. So I made sure I scoped it right. I saved this. I did update the task group to use this new connection, and I did run another deploy on it. So we can see that on this release here, this deploy ended up working just fine. We can demonstrate it. We're going to go back to our old service connection and see if that one does. I may have to go back in and add that service connection. These are, and again, the whole point of this, sometimes, you get stuff, you're working on it, but you find you have to debug this stuff sometimes, right?
Actually, one thing to show while we're here is you can look at the history of your task group and you can revert any changes that you've done.
You know what? Let's do that. Let's go.
So it's easy to go back.
Yeah. So let's go to this one here. I like that idea actually. So is there? Now we can go to this one. Compare differences, and let's go back if we can see. Does this one have that? That's interesting.
I think you have to roll back one by one.
Yeah. Okay.
Maybe not.
Maybe not. Yeah.
You can in the release pipeline itself. Maybe task groups work a little bit differently.
Yeah,
there.
maybe. Hey, look, this is there's so many different things that they do. So, I'm with you though. I thought for sure that they had the rollback when you had said it. I'm like, oh yeah, they do. Doesn't look like it in this case, but that's all right. Hey, we can be wrong. We are only human. And again, we'll just select the production. And for this here, I do realize the whole premise of saying it's easy and then it becomes hard. I'll create a new release. If you reuse the previous release, it will use everything from what was in that release. So unless you go in and change parameters, so it'll even use like the old setup. So it's not. It won't use the new setup if you try to redeploy. And I've got to go. I'm going to figure out what this problem was. It's got to be probably inside the managing the service principal or giving it the right rights. But again, you
got to assign it some permissions, I think.
Yeah, I forget. We'll have to come back and take a look at that in a minute.
Could be a different resource group there.
Yeah, well, the resource group that it's deploying to is consistent, so it's not. This one that I created, I know works because I used it earlier today in building the environment. So I know that this guy has all the rights. It's just something that's different in the one that I quickly created. And that's, sometimes when we rush through things, we may miss a radio button somewhere. But the point of what we're showing is that there's more out there that you need to go take a look at and see how it works, and not be afraid to try, and don't be afraid to fail, right? You're going to make mistakes. What's really nice here is we can easily revert and clean those mistakes up. So this one is deploying it out there. So there's obviously a difference between the service principal, service connection I created earlier and the one I just created on the fly here. And it looks like it's deploying pretty good. So we'll be able to see this in just a second. I will go over to Azure and we can take a look at where it is. So it's created this new resource group for us. Right here, this RG Pipelines Dev East US. And we can start to take a look at this infrastructure was created earlier today using, again, Terraform and our release pipeline for that. But this is where it's deploying this app to. And if we look at this app, we can go in here, and if everything is hooked up properly like we think it is, we can actually go to this deployment center. And I don't think we've ever just showed this before, but because the app is now deploying using that service connector, it actually can talk to Azure and see what's going on. So we do see this guy is right here, but it should show up. It may not be finished with the deploy. So let's look at our deploy. It's not finished. There, it's finished.
There we go. It just
and
finished.
Check that out. So there's the deploy. So again, we have that service connector allows that entry put in here. There is, believe it or not, also that service connector can be used to do release annotation notes on application insights, which is a kind of a cool thing as well. But again, our point tonight...
It's a two-way communication here.
Yeah, lots. It was to really kind of cover the... where are we? Service connections. That's it. There we go.
Cool. Is it possible to take it, another step further? I've seen in lots of places where when you're, say you finished a release, then you post a notification somewhere.
Oh, yeah.
Say you're using Teams or Slack or anything like that. Service connections can help there too, to really bring your whole process integrated in really just one place.
Yeah, so yes, you could certainly create and use the service connections. There are different kinds of ways of this. So these service connections, looking through here, there may be a generic one, also one that may work out for a incoming webhook, and also a generic one which can be used as an outgoing webhook. So you may put a webhook in there, and that webhook could be pointing out to something that knows how to read the data that's coming in, the payload. But there is also some other neat stuff that are not necessarily service hooks in this case. That is, we can plug straight into like Slack, and that one's more user assigned, right? That one's based off of me and you as a user. But yeah, there's some classic ones. We can take a look at some of these classic ones, see what they have in here. So there's subscription, authentication, what do you want to name it, description. So this could be if you wanted to have a generic one out to Azure, where you have a username and password. You can definitely do that as well. I don't know, did that answer your question?
Cool. Yeah, definitely. Cool. Well, thanks for showing this to me. I think can go a long way with this and take it further.
And believe it or not, this is the only way you're going to get your application off of Azure DevOps, other than maybe creating a package or somebody downloading a package. But in order to deploy, you do need a service connection.
That makes sense.
Yep.
Cool.
So cool.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Talk with you later, Kelly. Have a good day. Bye.
Bye, Mike.
Bye.
Don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you have questions or topics you'd like us to cover, let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching.